Can I just quickly check one thing with you guys? How many of you suddenly went from seeing Bastion as this monkey deck to suddenly just buying it after episode 6? Because I definitely think about this deck very differently thanks to this guy. Alright, newfound Tohya fans, it's time to bring it home as we're finally going to take a look at arguably best boys in... I don't know who best boy is. Is it Danji? Is it Yuyu? Is it Tohya? Is it Masanori? Is it Zaxa? I don't know, man. Zaxa sounds pretty tier 3 to me on the best rating, as much as I love Orphist, but tier 3 definitely, you know, maybe not so much in his placements, but in his other things. Anyway, folks, today we're going to take a look at a deck profile for Bastion. Of course, Bastion is a deck that a lot of people have been hyping up as one of the very best, you know, representing Keter Sanctuary and definitely doing it really well. Like, this deck is really strong, it hits hard, and more so than anything, it's really good for beginners to start playing with. Like, this is a super beginner friendly deck, it's very straightforward to play, and I will present to you today why that is, and then we'll go over some example plays, some of the highest ceiling plays, you know, in terms of like the big combos you can do, and then we'll do a little mulligan as usual and talk about ride deck discards. Also, if you need to pick up any cards for this deck, you can go to parkage.com and use discount code DifferentFight for 5% discount at checkout. Isn't that crazy? Wow, you just got a cool leak that I play heals. That's crazy. I can't believe that. Anyway, let's talk about the deck. First things first, let's talk about the ride deck, which of course be the ones from the start deck. So we can zoom back in here. All right, so here we go. The starter can be whichever one you want as long as it's Keter Sanctuary. We do use the one from the start deck, which is base. He's pretty based. Based on what? I'm not sure. Then we have the fort that we only play at 1 copy. So basically just for his Vanguard Circle skill, because the Vanguard Circle one is okay, it's kind of want to get 5k, just not worth the deck space. However, the first skill says when he's rode upon by rooks, which is the grade 2, you can reveal 2 grade 3s from your hand to reveal the top card of your deck and call it to a Vanguard Circle if it's a unit card, and if not, then you put it into the drop zone. So basically if it's an order, it goes to the drop zone, so keep that in mind. Then the grade 2, of course, is the rooks. When you ride over him with Bastion, Apex Legends Bastion, reveal 3 grade 3s from your hand and draw a card. So, you know, it's not as amazing as like top decking a grade 3 on turn 2, but drawing a card is still very good, basically the same level of plus for having all those grade 3s in hand. His Vanguard Circle skill is okay. I used to play him at more copies in the deck, but it's just not really worth it. It's a 15k booster, but like when you drive check this and you whiff your Bastion skill and you don't get any grade 3s, it definitely hurts a lot. And finally, your main grade 3, Mr. Bastion himself. First things first, he does give plus 2k to all grade 3 units on the board, including himself, and once per turn at the end of the battle, your drive check reveal the grade 3, you can discard a card from your hand to choose a rearguard and stand it, and it gets plus 10k power. So this is a very steady 4 attack deck for the current format. It's just a very strong deck. You have a lot of grade 3s in your deck as well. It's packed to hell with grade 3s, so if you like that kind of wacky ratio in the deck, then you'll definitely enjoy Bastion as well. So yeah, that's the ride deck. Very straightforward. You basically aim to build up a big board, and of course we use those Tohya ride deck sleeves from the boxes as well. So you build up a nice little board that attacks for big numbers, and you restand it with Bastion. It's pretty straightforward. Then of course our remaining 3 copies of Bastion. So Bastion is, you know, you want a Persona ride, so that's why we're running the remaining 3. Pretty self-explanatory. Getting into, all right, we're going to get into staples now. So I'm going to talk about which cards in my opinion are super staple in this deck and you must have, and then we're going to talk about the kind of flex slots and what you can actually like cut or try out different ratios for. Some of these cards will maybe go out in the future sets, but at least for the time being, for set 1, these are definitely like cards you must have. So first things first, of course, goes without saying, Alden. You know, this card is in Europe about like 9 euros. I know it's much more expensive in America though, so I think once the delays come through, hopefully his price will drop to his European one. Alden says when he's placed on Rearguard Circle, Counterblast 2 and Soul Blast 1 to choose a card from your hand and call it to Rearguard Circle, and then if you call it grade 3, you draw 2. Pot of Greed on legs, just like Verena Arcs. What a fantastic card. You know, everyone likes Pot of Greed effects. They're very cool because they draw you extra cards. They can call down more cards to attack with, you know, get more cards in hand to guard with, etc. On top of that, when he attacks, if you have 3 or more grade 3 units, he gets plus 5k until end of turn, which means if you attack with him, he gains 5, and if you use Bastion's skill to stand him and attack with him again, he gains another 5, so he gets plus 10 for that turn, which is a really, really important part. So this card is just a huge MVP for the deck. Drawing 2 and gaining power on attack is like everything you'd possibly need in rearguard, so he's definitely a 4 of like just a must-have for this deck. Just, it's way too good. That's the best thing I can say about it. It's just way too good. Then in terms of another card that we really need is the Fossado. Senor Fossado is going to come in here and, you know, rock the heavens. So he has 2 effects. Of course, the first one says he cannot be chosen by your opponent's card effects on Rearguard Circle. So that means prison cannot imprison him. Eugene cannot retire him. He can be selected by the Keter Sanctuary order that says, like, you know, choose an opponent's column and put it to the bottom of the deck. He specifically specifically cannot, but your opponent can choose his booster if you call something behind him and put him as a result to the bottom, because then you're not targeting him for card effect, you're targeting the booster who then takes the column. Basically, that's kind of how that works. So that's of course still a really good effect because it just gives you a really good matchup against stuff like Prison. And the second skill is when its attack hits anything, countercharge 1, soul charge 1. That is really good, simply because you can basically bully your opponent's rear guards and or bully their face, whichever you prefer, and basically get free soul to use for your soul blast effects, you know, just like Alden, he needs soul blast 1, or, you know, countercharge, just like for Alden, you know, he can blast 2 for his draw effect, so you basically get those resources back and you can use them more often in a game, which is really cool. Next card we run at 4 of, which is basically the best defensive card this deck has right now, is the 4 copies of Cocabiel. Yep, Cocabiel indeed. So her fantastic art, you know, very Angel Feather inspired, actual analyst Cocabiel. Actually though, alright, in Guardian Circle Continuous, if your Vanguard is Apex Ruler Bastion, she gets plus 5k shield for every 2 of your grade 3 units. So the way this works, of course, is let's say you have just your Vanguard and her, she'll be a 5k shield because you have 1 grade 3 unit, which is Bastion, and 1 which is her, so that's 5. But if let's say you have like a full field, so you have like 6 units on the board including your Vanguard, and then you guard with her, right? So then she'll get fully like 5 for every 2, but you only have like, you know, for every 2 that's still 6. But if you guard with let's say a grade 3 and her, then you have 8 because it counts the Guardian Circle, and so therefore she becomes a 20k shield. So a really good card, just another defensive option for the deck. You definitely want to draw into her, you know, in the later stages of the game where you have to start defending especially, and she becomes very chunky with the full board, so of course she is really good. I don't see her getting cut in the future either. Another staple that is definitely, like, at least in this aggro build of Bastion, I probably should have said, this is like the more aggressive, like just go face build of Bastion. There is a control Bastion, which I will deck profile in the future. I want to get through all 10 ride lines first, and then I will get to the control Bastion and like other variants of some decks. But so Darkstrain Dragon is a card that's played in this variant, which says if you have 3 or more grade 3 units, you can Soul Blast 2, and all of your grade 3 units get boosted until end of turn. So of course you have to activate this in the main phase, but then all of your grade 3s, even like not including just him, can boost, which is really cool. And they get the plus 2k from Bastion as well, so don't forget that. Like this is a 15k boost thanks to Bastion. And so basically we only need 3 copies because we only need 1 of him on the board at a time. That Soul Blast 2 is pretty heavy as well, so we definitely need the soul that we get from Fasados, like on hit and stuff like that, to actually keep that cost going, which is really important. And the other card that helps us build up that soul quite a bit is of course Mr. Rafluke, you know, one of the grade 3s from the start deck. His skill is also very simple. So he basically just says you put him into the soul to choose a grade 3 rearguard and give it plus 10k. So you can give this to Fasado, you know, to make it be more of a threat. You can also give it to the Alden because he'll be probably your main restanding card, so you can also power him up. So it's also very strong. So yeah, generally speaking, this is just a good card for the time being. It also gives you soul to use for the Dark Strain, so that's also very nice. And then of course another very important staple that we must have in our deck is 4 Perfect Guard, so definitely make sure you pick up your Aegismere Dragons. This card is super important, purely for the fact that it is one of the PGs that if you only have 1 or less cards in hand, then you don't need to discard for. So you only discard if you have 2 or more cards in hand. So of course it's the, you know, booster set PGs, and as we have had in every single deck profile so far, we are playing them. So this leaves us outside of triggers with basically 4 flex spots. Of course some cards can be reduced to like 3, maybe you have like 5 flex spots, but a lot of different people do different things with that flex slot, you know, whether it's playing orders or painkillers or like, you know, the grade 2s or other grade 3s. There's like the Snake Witch as well that is played by quite a few people, but let me show you my choice in what I'm playing with this deck. So for the times where you don't draw Alden, let me give you a great piece of advice. It's the Hour of Holy Judgment Cometh. This card, I think it's going to be cut in the future, but for the time being, it's okay. It's a grade 3 order that costs counterblast 2 to draw 2 and give a unit plus 5k. You do need the draw power in this deck that the Alden gives you, but honestly, like this card can definitely substitute for it. It's the same cost as well to keep drawing cards, make sure you have attackers to field and stuff like that, draw into your Cocabiels to actually like survive and stuff. So it's definitely a pretty good order, and of course it's a grade 3, so when you check it with Bastion or like you have it in hand for the ride line, it still activates the effects if you do reveal it for that effect. And then the last 2 cards I choose to play is Lepisto. So I've gone the full helmet, you know, just full combo into this deck because Lepisto basically says when you would check a trigger on a drive check, you can counterblast 2 to stand her and give her 5k power. So this is basically just there for when we want to go for a 5 attack pattern, because she stands herself and then Bastion will stand another thing. In a case where you check a trigger and a grade 3 basically from your drive check, you essentially get 5 attacks, and that's just a really big high roll that can definitely win you games. So it's important to keep that in mind. Like, this play can win you games, but it's Counterblast 2, and it doesn't really give us any like resources for that Counterblast. It's just like a finisher basically, so we don't need to play more than 2. All right, then for triggers, of course, we have the over trigger for Keter Sanctuary, Armor to Noah. So the additional effect when you drive check it is that until end of turn, you can also perform drive checks for the battles your rearguards attack. So if you check this, you know, on that big like grade 3 like Bastion plus Lepisto turn, of course that's like super huge because you can get to like drive check a bunch of times. So of course, you know, it's just a really nice over trigger because of that big kind of like power spike you get. Like, your hand fills up so much that even if your opponent survived the plus 100 million, you know, in your drive checks on your rearguards, you know, your hand's gonna be so big from that because you have like full grade 3s on your rearguard circles that, you know, you're probably gonna survive whatever they throw at you in super. So it's really, really important to be running this one, in my opinion. You can still run the start deck one if you don't have access to it. I think it's perfectly fine. You know, 2 times 100 million is definitely huge. But yeah, that's just basically the choice here. It is a really good over trigger, so we do definitely want to run it. All right, and now let's take a look at the trigger lineup here. So it's pretty straightforward. We're running 8 of the booster set crit, Disma. Never answer. If somebody asks you what's the name of the Keter Sanctuary critical trigger that's in the booster set, don't answer. Just don't say anything. Then we play 4 Gurgant, the other critical trigger. And then we also play 4 of the heals. And the heals that I play are the ones from the start deck as well. And finally, I play 3 fronts. I'm part of the front supremacy gang. I think this deck doesn't need draws. You draw enough, especially if you play the order, you know, from just the order, as well as, you know, Olden. So basically the fronts, I think, just help to give you more shield power in your deck, which is really, really important. And on top of that, they also help you just sometimes just high roll. Honestly, like, fronts are still pretty huge in this deck, especially because you attack rearguard first, then Vanguard, and then you restand that rearguard. So it can become a little bit too difficult for your opponent to manage. So I think fronts are actually quite okay in this deck. So I do play the 3 fronts in addition to everything else. Alright, so here's a potential like really strong like board state to have. So let's use Darkstrain Dragon here to Soul Blast 2 and basically just have boost on all our grade 3s. So that's a really powerful turn. So here, let's say we didn't Persona Ride. This is just kind of like, you know, attacking with a bunch of units. Let's first attack with the Alden. You do want to boost on the first attack because you get plus 10k when you're restanding with Bastion, and if you don't check, you know, a grade 3, then you can still give the power here and you get the boost power out of this too. So this is attacking for 20 plus the 15, so 35. That's actually huge without Persona Riding. And now the interesting thing is that you can actually attack with the Lepisto column here too, because if you have Lepisto, like let's say you don't check any triggers, but you check the grade 3, you will be able to stand this. You know, if you check no grade 3s but still check triggers, you can stand this with Counterblast 2. So it's still pretty cool. So this is another big attack. Basically 30k, which is definitely still huge, and then another 30k from our Vanguard. So let's say here we check like 2 grade 3s, right? We check 2 grade 3s, so we can't actually stand the Lepisto, but let's say, you know, we're going to discard one of the grade 3s to stand Olden, and now he'll gain plus 5k again from his own skill when he attacks, and 10k from Bastion's skill. So this is 23, 25, 35, which is still really, really huge. But let's say there's a different situation where we basically, you know, attack with the Bastion, and the drive check is like the following, right? So you go grade 3, okay, cool, I can discard 1 for Bastion's effect, and trigger, cool, I can use her effect to Counterblast 2 and stand her, and then I'm going to use Bastion's effect to discard 1 and stand the grade 3, and I got the front trigger, so that basically powered up my entire front row, so that's going to be extra huge now, and you can basically swing with these massive attacks for more, and basically finish the game like that. So the deck is really straightforward, but this is kind of like the big high roll, like the biggest like ceiling you can hit with this deck for now, but it's definitely very decimating and just like huge attacks. Obviously on turn 2, when you use the ride line, you know, and like you basically ride over this and you reveal you know, 2 grade 3s and you top deck a grade 3, you can definitely get a lot of early damage in as well. Also keep in mind that if you do top deck Olden and you have 2 damage when you use, like when you ride up to grade 2, then you can actually use Olden's effect, which is also really cool because he just needs to be placed, not placed from hand. So even if he's placed from deck, that also works. All right, now let's take a look at some ride deck discards, and after that we're going to take a look at a sample mulligan. All right, quick overview of ride deck discards. Generally speaking, if you have too many Darkstrain Dragons in hand, you really only need 1 per game generally, so you can definitely discard the extra copies that you get for the ride deck. On top of that, in the early game, Lepisto doesn't really do too much. She's like a late game win more card rather than being like a super necessary staple for the early game like Olden, so you can discard her as well if you open too many copies of her, or just open her early. Also, if your hand is full of Oldens, or even if you have just like 1 Olden and you believe in drawing into another one later on, the order can be ditched for the ride deck as well. Of course, when dishing these grade 3s, make sure that your hand is still have like 2 or 3 to use the ride deck itself. Very important detail there, so just keep that in mind. Refluke is also sort of like a nice card, you know, just to set up soul and also give you like extra power in your rears, but it's definitely not like a big staple in setting up your win con. You know, it's not Olden, it's not Fasado, so I think it can also be ditched if you open it. And finally, sometimes you could just gotta ditch triggers. We don't run any draw triggers in this deck, but sometimes the crits do need to be ditched for the ride deck as well, and it just kind of works like that sometimes, so don't be afraid to ditch them if you have a few too many triggers in hand, but do keep in mind they are your main source of shield power in the deck. All right, now it's time for our example Mulligan. So let's take a look at how we set this up and, you know, kind of play through the early game, but it's definitely quite straightforward for this deck, so it's nothing too challenging in my opinion. All right, so we have our deck shuffled. Let's give it a quick half cut and get into it. You know, the deck is off camera just so I have more space for the field, so don't worry too much about it. Ooh, so this is a pretty interesting opening hand. This is a very nice opening hand. So Alden is good, and of course Bastion for Persona Rides is always going to be good. Let's send back the 3 triggers. Obviously Persona Rides are something you always are very happy to open. Then we get the order, another order, and a crit. So our ride deck discard is pretty obvious here as well. As usual, going left will be us, going right will be on the opponent's side. So let's see who goes first. It's going to be, I think this is a 6. Yes, so it's going to be the opponent. I keep going second in these, man. All right, so we're going second. No big deal. We draw into a PG, and of course we're going to discard this because we don't need multiple copies in order to ride into the fort. And because we went second, we draw an extra card into Cockabeel, which is definitely very nice. The early game is definitely very much just like swinging, you know, hitting, passing, nothing too complicated. You know, he takes some damage, over trigger. Jesus Christ, I feel like that's not the first time that happened already. I guess that kind of ends our opponent's turn. Turn 1 over trigger does happen sometimes. It definitely does come up here and there. All right, we can see this hand as well. Pretty interesting. We do have an Alden in hand, and we could just ditch the order here. I feel like it's not a bad play to just ditch the order here because we have a lot of really nice other cards. So let's ditch it and basically ride into the rooks. And now we're going to be able to show 2 grade 3s to our opponent. Generally try to show non-impactful ones, right? Showing your guard value is not good. Showing that you have Persona Ride is not good. Showing that you have Alden is not good either. Reveal as little information to the opponent as possible. And I think showing they have Fasado and a booster is not too much information. So I think you're fine with that. So we call the top card of the deck. It's a Bastion, but it's a grade 3 you can bash with. So of course that's good. Bastion, more like Bastion, right? All right, 10k attack, grade 3, nothing too big there, and then just swing for 13, and that's all she wrote. Then our opponent crits us because they're a good player. We lose a Persona Ride, very sad. Of course, we have a fat hand, but of course not much like shield value or anything to do with, so of course we're gonna have to basically just take another damage here, basically. All right, and it comes back to us, and we draw for turn here. It's a pretty good question. We actually do have a pretty nice setup for like a big push turn, so we might even want to go for like... We could even discard the trigger here and just like set up a really nasty board. So I'm going to go for that actually. We're going to discard the crit and just ride into the Bastion and then use the effect to again show... Make sure you show the same cards as well, you know. You don't want to be revealing too much information. So we draw an extra card. Then we can move this Bastion back and then we're going to call out the Alden. Alden's skill lets us Counterblast 2 and Soul Blast 1. So let's get the starter out of there to basically call a card from hand. And then if it's a grade 3, we draw 2. I'll call the Fasado out here, which my opponent knew about, and then draw 2. All right, nice. We draw 2 more shield power, which is pretty cool. We can put the Fluke here and basically use it next turn if we need to after boosting with the Dark Strain. So we're going to use the Dark Strain's effect here to Soul Blast 2 and give everything a boost. All right, pretty good board so far if I do say so myself. So let's attack with this. This will gain +5 and +2, so it's 20. With a 15k boost is going to be 30. And then here, because we don't have Lepisto, we want to put triggers here. We'll attack with Bastion next. So this is basically swinging for the 30 as well. We're going to swing, crit, very nice, crit power. Second check, grade 3, perfect. So we deal 2 damage. And now because we check the grade 3, you can discard 1. Let's discard the Fluke to stand the Alden, and he gets +10k power. So let's swing with him again. So now he's 23, 25, 35. Very strong just on his own. And this one is 23, 25, boosted by 15. That's going to be 40. 40, look at that, so strong. And so basically you're just kind of going back and forth. Like of course this turn we have like fat shields with Cockabeel. We can get another damage, you know, maybe top deck into another Alden for next turn. But basically like you can just kind of persevere, you know, like just dropping triggers and stuff like that, you know, dropping like extra grade 3s for PGs and whatnot. Of course next turn we might not have the soul anymore, you know, because we didn't hit with Fasado to use Dark Strain. So, you know, let's just say we guard with this and then it comes back to our turn. And, you know, just kind of the same thing all over again, right? You draw. Wow, an Alden. Isn't that crazy? We're going to Persona Ride to draw. So here after Persona Riding, actually, we can use the Fluke to put into the soul to give +10k to, like, let's say, the Fasado. And now we actually have enough soul to use Dark Strain again. That's another really nice thing about this card is that you can turn on the boost once again. If you really want to go in hard, you can call that grade 3 you had in your hand if you're trying to win this turn, you know, just for that. So basically, you know, you're just bashing, bashing front, grade 3, you know, we can discard the grade 3 to basically stand this. It doesn't have to be the grade 3, but I mean, my hand is 2 fronts, so I kind of want to keep that. And then just swing. So, I mean, one swing, not 2 swings. This isn't Magnolia. So yeah, this deck is very straightforward. I think it's definitely easy to understand and easy to pilot, and very strong. So if you're a beginning player and you like that aesthetic, or you like Tohya as a character, you know, these characters are very powerful. Vanguard characters can easily get you to just buy product and like buy start decks or buy the actual cards of the character, and I definitely feel that because I didn't care about this deck anywhere near as much as I do now thanks to Tohya. Alright, so what did you think? This was a quick deck profile for the Bastion deck. Definitely very straightforward, but very powerful deck. So I do recommend picking it up if you are a new player and you like this kind of aesthetic. Especially if you live in Europe, this deck is definitely still pretty cheap because, you know, Aldens here are quite cheap, like 8 or 9 euros. In the US, I hope it does drop because this card will definitely stay necessary for quite a while. And yeah, hopefully you guys learned something about this deck as well. If you were struggling to build it, hopefully this gave you some ideas. The grade 3 lineup is pretty flexible, especially those like 5 slots at the end. And some people do cut some stuff like Darkstrain, you know, for the Control Bastion build too. So I'll definitely talk about that in the future, so you can look forward to that. But anyway, all that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.